Welcome to Accelerating Change. This session will begin soon.
Welcome to Accelerating Change. It's our wrap up to a wonderful afternoon, morning, a day of really thinking about how to help women soar, whether it's in the boardroom or it's in the C-suite or wherever it is. The WBC has been here to help you see, feel, and think in new ways. And there are three of us, and I hope my third partner, Brittany Cole, joins us, but I have Felicity Hassan with us today. And the three of us are going to be talking about what we've heard all day, but particularly how to accelerate change. I'd like to begin by talking about what the Women Business Collaborative is all about. So let me share with you, because some people have been chatting about it, asking about it. Who is this? What are you doing? And I'm so excited that you brought us all together for our day to learn more about how do we accelerate women so that they can become the women they'd like to be. How do we rethink and accelerate diversity and women's leadership in business? So the Women Business Collaborative, we're about 3.5 years old. We're an unprecedented alliance of over 70 women's business organizations and hundreds of business leaders. It's become an amazing organization to build a movement to achieve three things: equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. If you think about it, if we can move into the boardroom, into the decision-making, into the C-suite, how can women begin to shift? One of the women today said so wisely, when women begin to build businesses, they think about how to change the world, not just how to build the profits. So through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we mobilize thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. That's what today has been all about. So we live our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. About 34% of our board are people of color. And I'd like you to think through what you can learn about us on our website, wbcollaborative.org, our 9 initiatives, and the key areas that we focus on. I've noticed that Brittany has joined us. And so if you guys could turn on your cameras and unmute yourself, and let's begin to think about how can we share what the day has been. Thank you so much. So let me introduce both Brittany and Felicity. And then our audience is waiting to hear what you heard today. I am too, because I've spent my day among entrepreneurs, which is a passion of mine, but I'm also deep into it. And it's a great time for us to reflect on what we've heard, but also the call to action for our audience so that they can accelerate the changes. There's a movement here and momentum. And the only time it really works is if we gather and begin to share and push forward. So I have with me Felicity Hassan. She's an executive search professional committed to making leadership and the boardroom more inclusive and representative. She is also a published author and serves on the board of the Women Business Collaborative. And I think that Felicity has one of the most marvelous experiences when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. And she's going to weave that in a little bit here so that you're going to learn more about it. And then we have Brittany Cole, who I'm absolutely thrilled to know. Felicity and I know each other 2 years now. Brittany and I have just met. So she lives by this motto: thrive through it. As a TEDx speaker, I'll say it again, thrive through it, because that's what we're all trying to do. She's a TEDx speaker, a coach, CEO of Career Thrivers, and author of the best-selling book on redefining resilience. Brittany's Career Thrivers is a leadership development organization that partners with corporations to cultivate an inclusive and resilient culture where all women can thrive. And so we're going to thrive through this today. It's been a pleasure sharing this whole work together. I'm going to ask you guys, what did you hear today? Then I'll share what I heard through the entrepreneurship programs, but I'm anxious to see what I missed because I have a hunch I'm going to be watching a lot of videos afterwards. Brittany, you're shaking your head yes. I want you to open your speaker and share with the audience, what did you hear and what do we hear going on?
Absolutely. So I had the pleasure of joining the corporate leaders for the Women in Corporate Leadership Roles track. And we just had a powerful session. You can see we got a little passionate and went a little over on the last session around women in tech exec roles. But we kicked off, and there have been some really core themes. One core theme that we've heard throughout the sessions today has really been around going beyond mentorship and really ensuring that there are sponsorship opportunities. And it made me really, really excited to hear so many corporate executive women talk about the power of having really strong allies. And I know here at WBC, we have our Men as Allies program that we're excited to kickstart and get off of the ground. But that was a core theme that we heard today. We also heard a very clear theme around showing up as a brand in your role as women, right? In the corporate workspace. How do you ensure that? I believe the quote was, "You are a brand and your employer is the client," right? So that's a complete perspective shift on how you show up in the workplace and really own your career advancement and really make your aspirations known. So some really, really great sound bites and insights from the corporate track. What about you, Felicity? What did you hear today?
Oh my goodness, what an overwhelming day of like learnings and insights. I just think, I'm always overwhelmed by how incredibly bright and eloquent the speakers are and how much, shared experience. And I think one of the things which I think really differentiates when you hear some of these panels, and we heard from men as well, but when you hear from a lot of women, like their propensity to bring in like lived experience, their ability to really kind of show vulnerability in a scenario which really helps to build a story. And I think we all know and we've all learned that people kind of understand, and that it's much easier to educate people when they can really like build the picture in their head of the experience that you've had. And I think that's what I was hearing around this notion of rethinking and driving corporate purpose, which was really kind of a lot of the theme of the conversations that I sat in on today. So I love that you were kind of hearing about allyship. That was definitely kind of popping up in the conversations that I was hearing today. But some of like the key high levels, and I know that we'll dig into it during the conversation today, is that purpose is not PR. Purpose is table stakes for all organizations. And I've been hearing this over and over again. And perhaps it's that kind of that consciousness of like, when you've heard it once, suddenly you see it everywhere. But I think that sense of, what we've just experienced over the past couple of years, and it was illustrated in the third panel that I heard today, hosted by and moderated by Deb Clary, where she talked about, the Great Resignation, in her mind being reframed as the Great Awakening. And I think, that really resonated, because I was like, right, okay, yeah, we've all had this like amazing awakening over the past couple of years of what we want to do with our time. We want to be recognized. We want to make sure that we are working for organizations that actually really kind of act upon their beliefs, not just cut a check, not just write it into their principles, but are actually really taking notice and making sure that their purpose is being felt within their organization, for their employees and for their communities as well. So purpose being table stakes and that kind of like critical part within ESG, which facilitates whether or not you're going to be successful as an organization, was really kind of cool to hear. And then I think also, the second panel that I was listening to around like DEI innovation actually kind of boiled it down to, I think, measurable goals, which doesn't sound particularly innovative, but think about how long we've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, like forever. And like the pace of change is like extraordinarily slow. And I would genuinely put that back to, and perhaps that's the recruiter in me talking, because I do think that, like things that are quantifiable end up like, having a significant impact. But the propensity now actually being driven in some way by WBC for transparency and measurable goals. This is not about like affirmative action. This is not about like box checking, but like, if you don't measure it, we're not going to get anywhere. We have to be able to say like, hey, managers, we want your teams to look diverse. And this is what we mean by that. And you will be measured, and that will impact your ability to progress in your career and to get paid. Right?
Felicity,
And so
did you
like
hear?
those kind of things were impressive. I like that.
Well, I'm curious because as we were preparing for this, I was fascinated with Syndio and what they have created. Did Maria talk about her process for actually seeing if a company is equitable in its pay and what can that do in terms of data? Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So Syndio is this phenomenal tool which people are deploying to really understand pay equity and to remediate it. And I think, the most notable example of that was Salesforce, which is where it was kind of deployed like most publicly. And we saw, 10 million plus being leveraged to really kind of bring people into an equitable pay structure, equal pay for equal work. So she was saying, ultimately, their technology at Syndio can very quickly like diagnose where the gaps are. So she can go in, she can diagnose where the gaps are, and then it's really up to your organization to quickly remediate, because it's a very obvious and quick way. But she gave one example of one woman who was out of whack by 40 grand, $40,000 in her compensation. And she was saying, just think about when we think about, and this kind of plays into all the other conversations, like when we think about like how that plays into, our longer term capacity for wealth creation. If we've consistently been like 40,000 or somewhere around that mark underpaid in our role, that's extraordinary to think about like how much further we've got ourselves behind. So her tool is like an immediate kind of like a weapon to identify like where these gaps are, so that organizations can say, right, okay, this is where we can fix that. But they're also extending, Andy, and I love that you flagged this, they're also extending into career progression, because pay equity is not just about equal pay for equal work, it's about how people are progressing through the career path. And this is something that Khalil over at Akamai talked about around like the diversity pyramid. You look at organizations, you'll see so much more diversity at the kind of like the bottom rung of the ladder, and then it gets less and less and less and less and less as you get to the top. Like
that's
Maria's
what Kip Ryan always talks about. All of his staffing people who are recruiting are all women, and all the people managing are men. And I heard the same thing in real estate, where all the folks who are the real estate brokers are the women, and the guys who manage the office aren't the women. I want to go back to Brittany for a moment, because I'll get to my entrepreneur panels, and I love what you're talking about, Felicity. I'm anxious to hear what you heard in the Latinas, because there are similar patterns going on, and I don't want to lose the energy that I know Anna Dutra and the folks there were all so excited after the panel about having the opportunity to share what's going on. Something you'd like to share?
Yes, well, the takeaway from that panel dovetails nicely with what Felicity was sharing, and it was about intentional inclusion. So Sid really doubled down on that, and I think that speaks so loudly about culture, that we really, as an organization, Felicity, you mentioned like how long have we been at this work? We've been at this work since the late 1960s, since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's what brought this diversity conversation into organizations, initially because of punitive measures due to discrimination. And now, right, we've shifted from assimilation. Sid also talked about this idea of acculturation. So how do we move from Latinas and other women of color coming into an organization and trying to look like the dominant group, but really coming in and saying, hey, how do we get to know and really have a sense of awareness of the culture, so that we are intentional about Latinas moving into leadership roles within organizations. So this idea of intentional inclusion was really resonated really well. And the other big point there was really around relationship building, right? And networking. And so there are a lot of really great stories about, how do you cultivate relationships? And similar to that pay equity conversation, right? The pay equity really speaks to culture, right? And who is in those leadership roles and who is more likely to connect with one another. And how are you intentional in that process to say, hey, we want to ensure that as a part of maybe these senior executives after work or before work gatherings, we're intentional about who's in that space, who's on that.
Often being a single woman in meetings, I understand that feeling well when they all go off to the bar afterwards, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out, where do I go and who will I sit and have a bar drink with in some way. But it's important. I bet that Ivy Kasinga said lots of important things about culture. A chief culture officer is near and dear to my heart. But any insights from that group that Derek Klein brought together, because these are non-traditional pathways to the C-suite, some things that you want to share?
Absolutely. So Ivy had probably one of the favorite sound bites around this idea of situational mentorship. And I loved that language so much because I firmly believe that mentorship is all around us. And so she talked about maybe in addition to the idea of I have one mentor and I've identified somebody that I want to learn from that is pointing me to the door, as Jennifer mentioned, instead of that sponsor who's really helping to open the door for you. Really thinking about mentorship through the lens of what is it, maybe a skill that I want to be better at, or what is an area of the business that I want to learn more about, and finding someone that's in that lane of expertise. And for that specific situation, they become a mentor for you. And I think that really resonates deeply and is really a great insight for all of us to learn from. And I think that can even apply for mentors that you haven't met yet. I like to say I have a ton of mentors who have great books and great podcasts that I've never met, right? But I'm able to apply this idea of situational I was glad that Ivy shared that with the group.
We'll come back to the tech piece. Let me share with you some of the insights that I got from the entrepreneur panels. What an amazing, as you all have, amazing conversations, and they sort of built on each other. But what's interesting about your mentorship is Natalie Bufford Young, who's a president of Springboard, said people are complaining that they're over-mentored, but nothing is getting someplace. And so the conversation, a little bit, but not, was all about what is a mentor for and how do you use them appropriately? And when do you come looking for action with clarity of what you need for purpose, as opposed to everybody is a mentor. I like the mentor in dots, but it's you now who has to take charge of what it is that has to get done. And that becomes really quite important. And then, Pat Shea had a fabulous group there because Betty Hines was talking about women elevating women. How do we help each other? So if I could tell you a common theme through the whole entrepreneur thing is how do we help each other? And how do we begin to really, take this so that it is not a solo, but it's a collaboration. Betty talked about collaboration, connecting, communicating, courage. And everyone had a different way of saying a similar kind of thing. Really interesting way of even showing Laura Taylor how they do it as opposed to preach it. I think there's a movement from, I want to tell you what I believe in, to tell you what I'm actually doing, to Felicity's point about the data to say, and you're measuring and it's actually happening. And then, as we went into the Nicole Colbert, Nick, she had a great group. These are all African-American women, Black women who are all in business, who are pulling their money together for Bow Collective to begin to support each other in progress. And that makes it very powerful. And as Jill Johnson said, we haven't learned how to create wealth so that we can help the next generation. My parents, she said, worked, made a living, a nice living. Their friends worked, they make a living, they made a nice living. Now the question is, they didn't have any assets. And when it was time to close the business, they closed the business. But it wasn't like they could sell the business. And so that leads into Judith Goldcran and the whole conversation about building wealth. Not just getting money, but really doing something with it. You're shaking your head. What are your thoughts, Brittany? I love your shaking head because I want to hear what you're thinking.
Yes, well, I'm definitely a huge fan of the Bow Collective. And so I couldn't agree more as an entrepreneur myself that closing that generational wealth gap is really, really important to setting up businesses for success. And then I think where there are allies who are partners in the success, like I love the collaboration between the Bow Collective and WBC. How are we ensuring that we're being partners in that success? I'm also checking out the comments here. So we appreciate you all chiming in on your takeaways. Lori says, it's been an incredible day. This is a top 2 event for 2022. So I love seeing you all share your comments in the chat as well. Back to you, Andy.
Well, we've been getting lots and lots of rave reviews of people who are discovering they're not alone. And I think that's the lonely part of the long distance runner is something that we need to think about at WBC as well, because some of the people are saying, I thought I had to do it all by myself. And one of the things that Judith Goldcran's group and Catherine Swintek from Golden Seed said, and Alex Lebenthal too, he says, you don't need to do it yourself. In fact, if you do it yourself, you're making a big mistake. If you think that you're going to build your company and then sell it to Unilever, don't wait till 5 months before to find the right partner. You should start now to begin to build a collaboration, which is a little like what we're doing with WBC. Felicity, you're shaking your head. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was just really kind of like, it was really triggering something that Maria said when we were talking about purpose, which is that, she said it in a sort of slightly different way, but I think it kind of, it translates into this. Women need to stop kind of like having that mentality that we have to do it on our own. We need to stop having that mentality that it's our responsibility, to create a world where we are paid equally. And businesses need to stop pushing this back on women. This is like suggesting that all people of Black and African American descent are responsible for addressing racial inequity within business, right? It is not women's responsibility in order to kind of, to negotiate our salaries appropriately. It is up to business to be able to kind of make the right decisions. It is not up to women to make sure that they are constantly like making sure that they are getting access to capital. It's up to the individuals who have access to the capital and who are kind of giving out that capital to think equitably in terms of like who is going to be the best recipient and who's going to help drive a business through to successful goals. We need to actually start thinking about, and this kind of comes back to a point that all of us have made in this conversation, which is it's about allyship. It's about understanding. It's about us. And I can't remember which of you said it earlier. I think it was you, Brittany, about like owning that brand.
Yes.
We need to like own our brand and like be confident in ourselves, but also understand that we aren't accountable necessarily for changing like the hearts and minds of everyone around us. We can help drive good behaviors. And I think one of the key things that came out of today, which I think is like a real easy, actionable goal for anyone who leads a business who's listening in on this conversation, which is that women lead with empathy. And empathy is going to be absolutely critical. Empathy and EQ are going to be critical for like building successful businesses going forward. So understand that if you support and drive women forward, that's not mentorship, by the way, that's sponsorship. If you own that sponsorship and you drive women forward and you say, you know what, I've got somebody who I think you should work with Brittany. If you're constantly sort of thinking about who you can connect with and who you can kind of drive forward. And yes, women can support each other in doing that. And we need to make sure that we're looking out for each other. But we also need to make sure that we're holding our allies accountable and that we're educating them on how they can be better. It's not your responsibility to worry about my ability to negotiate. It's not your responsibility to worry about my imposter syndrome. Don't worry about that. It's your responsibility to make sure that you have a representative organization which is supporting those individuals that you will need to be successful in future. And you will need women leaders to be successful with the new individuals coming into your workplace. Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. It's not simple, but it is plain. It's not simple. Brittany, I noticed you went off mute, please.
Yes, well, I was just going to add to that, Felicity, and Edie put that in the chat for us here, a note that Ivy shared as the Chief Culture Officer at Chubb. She talked about going where you're loved. That was the language that she used. And I think that's a good measure on the other end for women, right? And it's a testament to culture in an organization, because really what, Felicity, you're speaking to is belonging. Right, which is really like the ultimate end of inclusion and equity. It's like the result of inclusion and equity is that you have colleagues that feel this sense of belonging. And so I believe that that's so true for women, that we go where we're celebrated and not just where we're tolerated, as an internal measure of, is this the right organization? Is this really a place where I can thrive every single day? So I'm not sacrificing my mental and emotional well-being for the sake of trying to climb a ladder in a place where maybe perhaps there's not the culture to sustain my growth.
Well, but I can't tell you how many mid-market clients I've worked with, and they don't really understand what is a culture that embraces a diversity, a cognitive diversity, gender diversity, racial diversity, anything. And the problem for humans is they have a story in their mind and they live that story as if it's reality. And so that requires a lot of story changing, because the people they hire don't feel they belong, to your point. They really come in and they're not quite sure what to expect, but there's no building. And so I have some clients and some friends who are actually building really equitable organizations, but it's hard, they tell us, because you're changing everybody's mindset, their story, so that you begin to think about conversations that reflect we, not I, that begin to think about collaboration that really is collaboration, not simply coordination. And you begin to let ideas flow in a way that begin to build better together than you do it alone. But you know how difficult that is for people who have been raised one way, where competing is what we do instead of collaborating, which is what we want. It's like a foreign entity. I often feel we're the renegades or the barbarians at the gate. You know, if you just shut the gate, it's okay, we'll be fine. But the times, they are changing. And I do think our job is to accelerate that. Were there some calls to act that you would like to share? Because I do think, I heard some in the entrepreneur world. So I'll share one that I thought was really cool. And that is, there's a dolphin tank instead of a shark tank that Springboard has. And I just love just changing the words. So you can come in and you can pitch, but you don't have to be feeling like you're being eaten in a nasty world. Well, if you can begin to change that environment so that it's a dolphin tank, not a shark tank, and that people feel loved and welcome, like Shima said, go to where you're loved, or it was Ivy said it, where you belong, where there's a brand, you can really find your way up. But your thoughts, what are the call to actions that you heard?
Well, I see a great call to action in the chat from Gwen that I'd love to share. She says, we need to change policy, systems, and culture. This is the only way to ensure equity, equal opportunity, and to encourage diversity. And I could not agree more. I think for women leaders in corporate, that is the call to action, right? It's a shift from how do we fix the diverse talent, which is an assimilation approach, which was an early 70s approach to diversity work, to really living the work of inclusion. We're not doing diversity work. We're really doing inclusion and equity work. And it really starts when you look at the policies and you say, how do you create conditions where diverse talent, where Latinas, where women of color, where women generally can truly thrive? And it really starts at that space.
The system space.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that's a great point. And I think there was a really simple one. There were so many takeaways from today. So let me start with that, because I'm definitely not going to do it justice. But one which really kind of jumped out to me, and it really was simple, this one, Andy, which was, it's not either or, it's both and. And yes. I think, so often in this conversation about women leadership and about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we hear about, well, I'm a white guy, or I have white sons. What about us? What happens about our future? And I think genuinely, cynicism aside, that mentality will hold us back from making progress, because there is this sense of, oh, we're just swinging the pendulum back and forth. And in Suba's panel, the speakers talked about, I think it was Khalil over at Akamai again, talked about, it's not about swinging the pendulum, it's about stopping the pendulum. We just want to stop it. This is not about, first of all, the data doesn't support that argument. There's still a vast amount of straight white men in leadership. So don't worry about it. There's always going to be a place and an opportunity for you. But the point is, we're talking about including everybody here. It's not about giving an adverse kind of advantage to one group over another. To your point, Brittany, it's about making sure that everyone belongs and everyone feels included. And I think when we move away from that fear mechanism that people have, which is that their achievements might be in some way impacted by this new wave of talent coming in, this new diverse wave of talent coming in, that people might question how they got to where they did and why. When we move away from that fear metric, that is when we'll start making real progress.
I hope that the generations that are coming up have a different view of the world. And I don't want to blame the pandemic. We never waste a crisis, because the great restructuring has given people time to think about what really matters. And for us, I know what really matters is building different, building both, building changing the conversation so that we can see the benefit to each of us. I don't ever want to be at a table again where anything I say is simply ignored. And we've all been at some kind of table like that, because, I'm sitting at a boardroom with 49 men and me, and there's nothing I say that will ever make through the barriers there. But this is time for change. And as women are entering the board seats, how are they being heard? How are they being listened to? What are the changes that are coming that are going to trickle down and up so that both of us can really be transformed. The call to action that I have for the audience that's been here with us is, don't stop. The chats that have come into me while I've been emceeing have been, this is fantastic. Good. What's your story? What's the next phase? How can you make the change? It's all about acting and action as opposed to hope. Hope is not a good strategy. It never has been. And to your point, we've been doing this for a long time. It's time to do it and to do it well, because there's lots of stuff ready for us to do this. We have about 2 minutes, so I'm going to ask you for last thoughts as we leave this wonderful day together. I also want to thank you before I can thank you again. This has been such a pleasure working with you on this. So last thoughts, Brittany, how about a last thought from you?
Well, I want to say thank you. It's been such a joy getting to learn and share with all of the panelists today in the corporate leaders track. So thank you so much. And last thought is to keep thriving. And
Yes.
there's at the table. Certainly go where you're celebrated. And for women, just continue to own that story, own that personal brand, and know that you are a brand. And I'd be remiss if I did not say, if there are men that are watching and that are joining us, you are a part of the DEI conversation. Become an ally of her. Get acquainted with our program. Learn how you can connect with the WBC to be involved in what we're doing to really elevate our non-action initiatives.
Now, did you say keep thriving? Is that what you said?
That is exactly what I said. And we do it best together. So let's thrive together.
Yeah. Felicity?
Absolutely. WBC faster together, right? So my call to action today would be find a woman and sponsor them. Talk about them, talk them up, find somebody that you know, that you respect, that you think is going to lead the future in your organization or in their own business, and really kind of like give them a good write-up. Really go out and make it happen, because it's like on those one-by-one connections that we really start seeing results. And we all know the power of network. Men have been doing this for years. Women haven't been doing it quite as effectively. So whether you're a woman or a man listening into this conversation, find a great woman out there, sponsor them.
My last thought is my appreciation for Women Business Collaborative for letting us rethink again. It's our second annual Rethink and Accelerate Diversity and Women's Leadership in Business. I have a hunch we'll be back. And I know that everyone who participated sent us little notes saying, how do we do more? Because I do think we're on the brink of something quite transformative. We need to thrive and we need to have a great time doing it, because I do think I like a little fun. And I'm going to say goodbye so that we can go right on to the next part, where Edie Frazier and Gwen Young are going to talk about our summit coming in September and all of the great things that we're going to be doing to celebrate trailblazers and award winners. Bye-bye now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hello and welcome. Thanks to all of you who have spent time today with us, rethinking and accelerating diversity in women's leadership in business.
And we welcome those of you who are just joining us this afternoon and evening as we announce the CEO recipients for the 2022 Awards for Excellence in Gender and Diversity and the WBC 2022 Trailblazer Gender Equity and Diversity Award recipients.
Before we get to this year's honorees, we have a very special announcement that we want you, our best supporters, champions, and allies, to be the first to know.
For the last 3 years, the WBC's annual summit has convened our community to highlight the action being taken to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the direct impact it is having in making a difference.
As we started planning for this year's summit, we saw an opportunity to give the summit a name worthy of this major event. So we're pleased to share with you that starting this year, our annual event will now be known as WBC Action for Impact Annual Summit. And this year, Action for Impact, A for I, will be held virtually on September 21st and 22nd.
In addition to bringing our community together, A4I allows us to recognize two key groups of individuals who are taking action to advance diversity and whose leadership and innovation have created new pathways for change within their communities and beyond.
The CEO Excellent in Gender and Diversity Award recognizes corporate leaders and their companies whose efforts have made significant contributions to the advancement of diversity within their companies and increased opportunities for women in business. The 2022 honorees are Julie Sweet, Accenture; Mike Kaufman, Cardinal Health; Arvind Krishna, IBM; Pat Paul Gelsinger, Intel Corporation; Nick Hieronymus, L'Oreal Group; Kathy Warden, Northrop Grumman Corporation; Ramon LaGuardia, PepsiCo; Hans Vestberg, Verizon Communications; Roz Brewer, Walgreens Boots Alliance; Kristen Peck, Zoetis. The WBC, our partners and allies, congratulate these extraordinary individuals and their companies who are driving gender equity and diversity in the workplace and the marketplace.
The WBC Gender Equity and Diversity Trailblazer Award is an annual recognition of individual leaders who have implemented innovative change within their own communities and beyond. These award recipients for their gender equity and diversity in all they do, from uplifting those around them to cultivating an environment of inclusion. Their efforts have paved the way for women within their communities and for future generations of women leaders. The 2022 WBC Trailblazer in Gender Equity and Diversity honorees are Sharon Bowen, Chair, New York Stock Exchange; Shelley Kapoor Collins, Partner Sway Ventures and founding partner, the Shatter Fund; Gina Davis, Academy Award-winning actor and founder and chair of the Gina Davis Institute for Gender and Media; Margot Georgiadis, CEO, Partner, Flagship Pioneering, and former CEO of Mattel and Ancestry; Sheila C. Johnson, co-founder BET Entertainment and founder and CEO, Salamander Hotels and Resorts; Judy Woodruff, anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour.
Congratulations to all of this year's honorees. Please make plans to join us September for the WBC Action for Impact Annual Summit. Registration is now officially open, and we invite you and your teams to join us using the link below to register now, today.
And again, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you September 21st and 22nd for the 2022 WBC Action for Impact Annual Summit.
Thank you for attending Rethinking and Accelerating Diversity and Women's Leadership in Business. Don't forget to register for our Action for Impact Annual Summit in September.